Hello Year 4 and welcome to the next lesson in our heroic homefront history topic. This is lesson 6. Last week we found out all about the precautions that people living in Britain had to make to try to protect themselves in case of air raids from the German Luftwaffe. In our learning this week we will look more closely at how another precaution affected thousands of children who are living in Britain through World War II.
Tomorrow, just you wait and see. There'll be love and
Now we already know that it was Hitler's plan to try to weaken Britain to force the country to surrender by bombing vital supply lines such as airfields, railway lines, military bases, ports and factories. This would then make it easier for Germany to invade Britain. This made living in cities, such as our local city of Portsmouth and Southampton, very dangerous. Thousands of children were evacuated from other larger cities, especially London. The British government wanted to try to protect children and young people from air raids by beginning to move them from areas that would be a target into safer areas in the countryside. The government called this Operation Pied Piper.
The responsibility lies on the shoulders of one man. By his latest act of naked aggression, Hitler has committed a crime not only against Poland, but against the whole human race. Against the mothers and children leaving the cities of Britain under the great evacuation scheme with a smoothness and speed that avoids a single accident or delay. As they start out on what to them is the great adventure, already German troops, guns and planes have crossed the Polish border to kill and to destroy. So Britain prepares to fight. And never in our history have we been so united in the knowledge that our cause is just. We have no material interest in the quarrel between Germany and Poland, but we shall be fighting for something which is vital to our life and to the life of all civilized people. For in a world where the rights of the weak and the honor of the pledged word can be overruled by the high hand of military power, there is no tolerable life for nations or for peoples. So in spite of our hatred of war, we must meet force with force. And as our children move from the crowded cities to the kind care of newfound friends in safer places, what a tragic contrast to the preparations for the horrible struggle that may lie ahead.
This mass movement of children, mothers with children under 5 and pregnant women and disabled people was called Evacuation. By the end of the Second World War, over 1 million children were evacuated from cities all over Britain that were in danger areas to smaller towns and villages in the countryside to escape the bombing. Fareham was one of the places where some children were evacuated too during the war, as it was safer here than in the cities. Can you think why the government called this mass evacuation of children Operation Pied Piper? Evacuated children had to leave their homes and families to be placed with other host families who had room for them in the countryside. Imagine how exciting but scary it would have been to leave your family and be sent away by train or boat to somewhere new, not knowing when you might be able to come home again. No one was forced to go, but parents were encouraged by posters like the ones we're looking at now and told that their children would be safer from German bombs if they moved to the country. After the first wave of evacuation in 1939, the war did not really get started in Britain, as we've already learnt, and lots of children were brought home by their parents. However, the government knew that there was still danger to come and attempted to promote evacuation to parents. Let's look at some of the government film that tried to convince parents to let their children go or to leave them in the countryside and not bring them back.
They're happy where they are. The children are safer in the country. Leave them there. And let's all be grateful to those who will give them a Merry Christmas. Remember, they're happy where they are.
A second wave of evacuation happened in the summer and autumn of 1940 when we know the Battle of Britain and the Blitz began. Once again, the British government tried to convince parents that it was much safer for them to send their children away and that their children would be happier. Although they attempted to sell evacuation as a wonderful adventure, can you imagine what it would have felt like for the children who left, not knowing where they were going and when they would see their families again?
For the second time in this war, and to another 120,000 of them, comes the great adventure. So it's goodbye to the cities and danger areas. Labelled and loaded and not forgetting their gas masks, the children head for the special trains. And they're not worrying, they're off on a holiday. These mass movements of our children are the greatest tribute in the world to the British way of life. Even in the midst of the storm and stress of battle, in the midst of the greatest war effort this country has ever known, we don't forget the safety of our children, on whom the future of our race depends. Humanity still plays a part in our life, even though some other nations may have forgotten what humanity is.
Children had labels attached to them as though they were parcels to say their name, how old they were and their home address. They stood at railway stations not knowing where they were going, nor if they would be split from their brothers and sisters who'd gathered with them. They felt scared about being away from their families, but also excited about going to a place that they'd never seen before or perhaps only read about in books. When the children arrived in the countryside, tired, hungry and uncertain whether they would ever see their families again, they were taken to a village hall or a school hall where they were met by the billeting officer, that was the person in charge of finding them homes, and a pick-your-own evacuee session would then take place where host families, the people that they were going to live with, haggled over the most presentable children, while perhaps the sicklier and grubbier children were left until last. And you imagine what it would have been like to sit there and wait to be picked by a host family and then taken home to somewhere that you'd never been before. Some children remained with their foster families for years. Some evacuees flourished in their new surroundings, while others endured a more miserable time away from home. We're going to hear a first-hand account of somebody who was evacuated during World War II and their experience of the time.
That's your great-granddad?
Yeah.
And we called him Army the Butcher because that's where we used to get all our meat.
Yes.
That's me, Anisha. I'm 11, and this is Mrs. Campbell. She's 78. She's been a family friend for many years.
Do you remember Nana Lily?
Yeah.
Well, you must take after her, Anisha.
Yes.
Mrs. Campbell was 5 at the start of World War II and lived with her mum and dad.
This was my dad, and his name was Simon, and he was born in Jamaica. He came over into the country. He was in the Merchant Navy.
Mrs. Campbell's dads would go away on ships for up to 2 years at a time. They carried goods like food, coal and oil. His job became even more important during the war as Britain relied on these things to survive. The family lived in Bute Town, close to Cardiff Docks in South Wales. The docks were targeted along with many big cities by enemy bombing raids. Over 2,000 bombs fell on Cardiff during the war and hundreds of buildings were destroyed.
It was quite a dangerous place to be in, and that's why some parents wanted their children to be evacuated.
Being evacuated meant leaving your home and going to live in smaller towns and villages outside the cities which were less likely to be bombed. 3 million people were evacuated during the war. Mrs. Campbell was one of them. She was sent with her classmates from St. Mary's, the same school I'm at now.
Right, Anisha? Now you're going to be an evacuee. There's your suitcase. There's your gas mask, which is very, very important. And there's your label.
Labels were important in case children got lost, and everyone had a gas mask, just in case poisonous gas bombs were dropped during air raids. Mrs. Campbell and I are going on the same journey that she took as an evacuee when she was 7.
We didn't go on trains very often. I don't think I'd ever travelled from this station before. So although we were a bit unhappy, we were also very excited.
Children from cities all over the country were evacuated on trains like this one.
Some have got little cases, like I had a small case. That's a gas mask. They all look happy, don't they?
Yes.
Because to all of us, it was like one big adventure.
Yeah.
We're going to Aberdeen, which is 25 miles from Cardiff, to where Mrs. Campbell and her school friends were evacuated.
Do you remember what you saw when you were on the train?
Actually, it's 70 years since I was evacuated. So my memory's not all that good. But one thing I do remember is seeing so much green, because where we lived in the docks, we didn't have a lot of greenery.
Did you know how long you were going to be in Aberdeen for?
No, we didn't. We didn't have any idea. All we knew, we were going to be evacuated, and we were supposed to be staying there until the end of the war. And I remember some of us were looking at our gas masks and wondering if we'd ever need to use the gas masks. I think we just, for the most part, enjoyed the journey, although we did have some children who were a little bit upset.
So you made the most of it?
Oh, we made the most of it. Those are very good words. We made the most of it. We had to.
Yes.
When Mrs. Campbell arrived in Aberdeen, she got off the train, just like me, with her suitcase, gas mask and label.
We all had to walk down to the school, and I wanted to go home, and I remember saying, I want to go home to my mother. Oh, this is where the Ammon Junior School was when I came here. It was really very, very different, but it's the stonework that I remember most of all. The stones and the mountains and the green trees. They remind me of when I was here all those years ago. We all stood in the big hall, and people would come in and they would say, oh, I'll have these children, and oh, I'll have those children. And I remember that my friend, Betty Neal, and we were about the last two to be chosen, because we wanted to stay together. And I wondered if anyone was going to come and take us, or if we'd have to get on the train and go back home. So then we were feeling a little bit apprehensive, as, you know, why hasn't anyone come along and taken us? But a nice couple, Mr. and Mrs. Challenger,
Yes.
they said that they wanted us to go and stay with them.
Mrs. Campbell and her friend Betty walked a short distance to this house, where Mr. and Mrs. Challenger lived with their daughter Hazel.
We came into the house, and Mrs. Challenger had a meal arranged for us. It was placed in front of myself and Betty Neal, and then I think it was then that it dawned on us that we were away from home, and we just sat there. We didn't pick up the knife or the fork. We just sat looking at each other. And then Mrs. Challenger said to us, she said, if you don't know how to use a knife and fork back, use your fingers. She just thought that because we didn't pick up a knife and fork, that we didn't know how to use them. How would you have felt if you were in my shoes, that you were coming out, leaving your mum and dad and coming up here to live with strange people?
I think I might have felt left out, because they would have had a daughter that would know them, and they might treat me differently than they treated her.
I don't think we ever felt left out, but now and again Hazel and I would have an argument. But the thing is, I could say, how did she feel that here were her parents taking in two other girls?
Yes.
And previous to that, she'd been the only child in the house.
Did your parents ever come to visit?
My hair was really, really bushy, and my mother used to plait it. But I'm afraid Mrs. Challenger didn't know how to plait my hair, so my mother would come up on a weekend.
Yeah.
She would plait my hair tightly,
Yes.
and then all during the week I'd just go like that with a brush. So that was nice and flat, and my plaits stayed in place. And also my dad, who was a seaman, was going away to sea, and my mother brought him up to see me. He brought me a handbag, a little leather handbag that he'd brought from another country, and I remember it had Red Riding Hood on it.
Why did you go back home to Cardiff?
I went back earlier than I was expected. My mother was a bit upset about that, and she just felt quite alone with me being in Aberdare and my dad not coming home anymore. What she said to me was, I'm taking you home because if we're going to die, we'll die together. I went home, but unfortunately I left a beautiful handbag with Red Riding Hood on. I've always regretted that.
After the war, Mrs. Campbell went back to St Mary's School and later became a teacher there, but she never forgot her experiences during the war.
The fact that you were, taken from your house, your home, put on a train, met new people, to me, it was almost like an adventure from an Enid Blyton book.
Now that we've learnt about how children were evacuated from cities in danger areas during World War II, we would like you to think a little bit more about what you would have packed in your suitcase if you had been an evacuee. Firstly, you're going to need to complete your evacuation label so that you can be recognised. Next, think about the items that you would pack. A government list was sent out to parents to tell them all about the practical things that should be packed in evacuee's suitcase. Things like a vest, a shirt with a collar, a pair of trousers, a pullover or a jersey, 2 pairs of stockings, a handkerchief, but there's nothing about personal items that would make an evacuee feel more safe or feel more at home. For your task this week, we'd like you to draw and label 5 items that you would choose to take with you and explain why you've chosen them by labelling your drawing. You're going to place them into the suitcase here that you'll find on the Google Drive. What would you take with you? Perhaps some special items to remind you of your family, or a precious toy that would make you feel better about being away from your home. Good luck with your History Learning Year 4. See you next week.